Squirrels! So hello, and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra video. My name is Chris, and today we will be talking about Go Hard, a card that I think has been quite controversial recently. I think people are a bit maybe fed up of the card, and of course its associated deck in Twisted Fate Go Hard. And I think it's time, I made my peace with this card and talked about it and talked about how to nerf the card if it indeed does deserve a nerf. So that's what we're going to go over today. We're going to talk about why the card is strong, does it need a nerf, and how you would nerf the card, because of course there is so many ways to nerf a card. It's very different to other cards in that way, that there is so many different ways that you could nerf the card, and then I'm going to give my recommendation at the end of this video. So see this is more like a kind of podcast type thing, put it on in the background, listen to it if you want, listen to my sweet voice if you want. And yeah, I'll be talking about Go Hard. So the first thing is that if you guys like this kind of meta talking video, please do let me know. I really love talking about cards and the game. I almost love talking about the game as much as I do playing the game, which might sound a bit weird, but I love all the sort of theory and meta and designing cards. I really love that side of card games. Yeah, I'll be happy to do more of these videos, so let me know if you do enjoy these kind of videos and would like to see more. But first, let's get into why is Go Hard a strong card. And obviously most of you will know it's not necessarily Go Hard that is the strong card, but more so Pack Your Bags. But of course Go Hard does have its uses as well. It is a 1 mana slow speed spell that drains any opponent unit or any unit for 1 health. And obviously this means that you can kill certain units, it means that you can gain some health, and it will also shuffle more copies of itself into the deck. Now that part on its own isn't that useful, but once you've played 3, of course, it will transform into Pack Your Bags, which we'll get into. But as I mentioned, Go Hard does have some uses, the fact that it can help keep you alive, it can potentially kill or drain units of their health, and of course something else that it can do, which is really nice, is give you a very cheap way of passing your initiative to your opponent. Now a lot of novice players probably might not understand this, but being able to react to whatever your opponent does is very useful in Runeterra due to the way the initiative system works. Being able to play something cheap and then saying your opponent off you go will often be a very good play. And reacting in Runeterra generally tends to be more powerful than being proactive, although not always, but in general that has been the case in this game. So Go Hard does have some uses on its own, but of course Pack Your Bags is really where the strength of the card comes from. Pack Your Bags, of course, will deal 5 damage to all of your opponent's units and their Nexus health. So it's dealing 1/4 of your opponent's Nexus health and also probably wiping their board of units as well, and all of that for 1 mana. Now that is obviously such a strong ability because it allows you to essentially keep developing units. Your opponent will know that Pack Your Bags is coming because you've played 3 Go Hard, so they know you've got a Pack Your Bags most likely in hand as you're developing all these units, and you essentially just have to wait for them to play it. And they play it, they kill off all your board, they deal 1/4 of your Nexus damage, and they have a pretty full board at that point, and you only have 1 chance to respond. So that of course is a very strong ability, and it is why Twisted Fate Go Hard has been one of, if not the top deck for the past month and a half, something like that. So now let's talk about does Go Hard even need a nerf? We've seen decks be the strongest deck for a month and not receive nerfs before, so it wouldn't be completely out of the question that Go Hard wouldn't see a nerf, and I've seen some arguments for why Go Hard does not deserve a nerf. One of them being, and I saw this on an Alan ZQ stream, he was talking about the card, and one of the arguments he made for the card not receiving a nerf is that it only appears in really 1 top tier deck. And when you compare that to cards like Pale Cascade, for instance, it's just another card that in pretty much well, not even competitive Targon decks, any Targon deck will play Pale Cascade. In fact, even Allegiance decks that are just looking for a splash will just splash Pale Cascade. You know, we saw that with the Shadow Isles Allegiance deck before the last set of cards came out. Fearsome Shadow Isles with Pale Cascade. So, you know, you could make the argument that, you know, Go Hard doesn't appear in every Shadow Isles deck. So why should it be deserving of a nerf? And this is a really interesting argument because, you know, on the face of it, it makes sense. But when you dig a little deeper, I think that this argument is a pretty flawed one, because Go Hard, of course, is a very synergistic card. Go Hard only works with decks that have a lot of draw power to them. This is why we've really only seen Go Hard work with either PNZ or Bilgewater, and really there isn't much in between, because those are the regions with the most draw potential, and you need to have a lot of draw for Go Hard to make sense. And just because a card is a high-powered synergistic card doesn't mean it doesn't need a nerf, because what will often happen with these synergistic cards is that you will get a, you know, one deck that is the most powerful deck for that card. We saw it with Lee Sin. This is probably the best example for you, is that, you know, Lee Sin, when he was 4 mana, everyone knows that he was the best card in the game. It was oppressive, but he only really appeared in Lee Sin Targon because that was his best deck. Now, Lee Sin still deserved a nerf, of course he did, and we're all very grateful that he did. But that doesn't mean he didn't deserve a nerf just because he was only in one top tier deck. It's more that just in high synergy cards, whatever the best deck that utilizes that synergy will just end up being the one that is just the better version of all the others. So why would you play the others? And that essentially is what Go Hard is. So I do believe that it is in line for a nerf, and I would be somewhat shocked if they didn't, because I think most people feel the same way. So now let's get into the exciting stuff, and that is, how do you nerf this card? Of course, because of the way the card works, there is so many different ways to nerf it. Often when we look at nerfs to cards, it's change the mana, change the stats, you know, change the speed. Generally that's how it works, but with Go Hard, whoa, there's a lot to get into. Of course, it comes as sort of two different cards in one, with Pack Your Bags and Go Hard, so you can nerf either side of it. You know, you could nerf many different, you could nerf the shuffling potential, you could nerf the actual effects of the different cards, you could nerf the Nexus damage, the overall damage, the drain effects, I mean, there's so many different things to nerf here with this card. Let's get into some of the options, some of which I just mentioned, and I'll talk about each of them in turn. So the first one I have seen mentioned or thought of was make it so that Go Hard doesn't drain, but instead just, you know, deals the damage, right? It's no lifesteal, it just deals the damage to the unit. And this obviously would make Go Hard worse against aggro decks, because now all of a sudden you aren't getting that life gain back, and, you know, potentially you could see some ability for, you know, a very aggressive deck to be able to go underneath Go Hard, something which I think is pretty difficult to do right now in the card's current state. However, I don't think that they would really go down this road, because of course Go Hard, whilst being a KDA card, is also a Shadow Isles card, and therefore being able to drain is very much part of Shadow Isles' identity. Of course, in pretty much all of their damage spells, it is a drain effect, from Vile Feast to Unspeakable Horror to Withering. Well, Withering Wail obviously does heal but deal damage as well, and Grasp of the Undying, of course, being a pretty good example. So with that said, I don't think they would ever go for the non-draining route. So let's talk about the idea of not dealing any Nexus damage on Pack Your Bags. What would that look like? And I think that's an interesting change, and one that they could make, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did make that change. It's not my personal favorite change, but it's definitely one that I think would make some sense. Of course, it would mean that, you know, you often aren't in danger, because oftentimes, you know, the Twisted Fate Go Hard deck will win a lot of games by playing Ledros, cutting your Nexus in half, and then playing Pack Your Bags on the same turn and, you know, dealing the 5 Nexus damage as well, which can be absolutely devastating. Whereas, of course, if they didn't deal any Nexus damage, then you could have, you know, the ability to survive later on into the game and potentially get a couple wins. So it's a change that I think would certainly nerf the card in a meaningful way, and would make it sometimes awkward to play for the Go Hard player, Because of course if they've only got 1 unit on the board, and I mean you're still playing 1 mana to kill that unit, right? So it still feels pretty good, but you might want to wait a bit longer, and if your opponent is a good player, they could, you know, just essentially say, I'm not going to play any units, play it, and just wait for you to play it, and that might put you in some awkward situations and, you know, lead to some good gameplay as well. Whereas when it deals the 5 Nexus damage, sometimes you just want the Nexus damage as well as the kill on the unit. And this nerf would take that away. Of course, another way you could nerf the card is to have pack your bags not deal 5, but 4 or even less damage. Now, when I think about this, I think this is a weird way to change the card, because I think if it was 4 damage instead of 5, I don't think that would be a big enough nerf. I think most of the time that would end up killing... It wouldn't kill as many units, of course, but I think most of the time it would still kill the same amount of units, and the 1 damage to the Nexus is like not that impactful, I wouldn't thought, in most games. So I don't think that would be big enough. So then let's go down to 3, and all of a sudden it's like maybe in a good spot, but is that maybe too weak? It all seems a bit weird to me, because as soon as you go down to 3, the only things you're killing really are 3 drops and less. Now, most games you're not going to get pack your bags till 6, 7, 8 online. So you end up in a very odd position where if you're only killing like 3 drops and less, there probably isn't that many 3 drops and less on the board. So it's a bit of an odd position. 3 damage, it would probably be the most balanced way, but it might just be actually too weak to consider play, which maybe, you know, most of you are fine with, but I'm trying to look up for ways, you know, that we can keep Go Hard a good deck, but not an oppressive one. So next up is the idea of having to play more Go Hards to get pack your bags. Now, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but in my mind, the KDA songs have something to do with this, lyric-wise maybe, or something. I could be completely wrong, and I'm too lazy to Google it, to be honest. I'm just going to wait for you to tell me in the comments whether that's right or wrong. But if that is the case, then obviously I don't think they would want to do that simply from a sort of thematic perspective. And if it's not the case, let's talk about that. If they were considering doing this, let's say you need to play 4 Go Hards to get the pack your bags. I think at that point, it might not be worth running. I think at that point, because it would become almost impossible or highly, highly unlikely to get the second pack your bags off. Sometimes you need that second pack your bags to, you know, even have a chance in a game, right? If your opponent has drawn particularly well. If it was 4 and you had to get to the 8th one to do it, I think that would be incredibly unlikely that you've reached that state before your opponent could really do anything. So that might be a little too weak. Again, it's not the worst change, and it certainly would be a nerf to the card. But in my head, that's a bit too far and would nerf the card a bit too much. But maybe I'm wrong. Of course, I don't get to test these things. If I could test it, I definitely would test that as an option, because I think if it wasn't too weak and it felt about right, then I'd be happy to sort of see where that would take the deck and the game. So one of the most popular suggestions I've seen is to make pack your bags cost more mana, and this of course is, I think, a pretty good suggestion, and it's one that I personally would like to see. How much you make pack your bags cost, some people think it should be 3, some 4, some 5, and I think somewhere within that range is probably right, so probably 4. And making, you know, let's say for argument's sake, pack your bags cost 4 mana, that would significantly change the card, because a real strength of pack your bags is because it only costs 1 mana, you can essentially just wait for your opponent. You can just wait for them and just keep playing things and keep playing things, and your opponent just has to keep passing. And eventually it gets to a point where you could just pass the turn back and they've wasted all their mana, and you still got pack your bags. You can do it at any point you want. And it just sort of makes your opponent feel like a hostage to the game, where they can't afford to play anything because you'll just kill them. But you can't afford to not play anything because you'll just kill them, but maybe a bit slower. So it really does leave you in this kind of awkward position. But if it costs more mana, then those problems would be somewhat alleviated, because now all of a sudden you can't just develop a full board and still hold Pack Your Bags open. At some point you're going to have to play Pack Your Bags somewhat proactively. And as I mentioned before, being reactive in this game tends to be better than proactive, so it would give your opponent a chance to respond and be able to build up. And obviously as soon as you tapped under the 4, 5, 3 mana, whatever it cost, then your opponent can know, okay, I'm safe for this turn, away I go. And that, I think, is a very important thing. And another one that I personally would like to see is to have Go Hard not be able to target your own units. I think that this is something that kind of goes under the radar a bit, but I think it would be such an interesting change alongside a mana change to Pack Your Bags. I don't think this would be enough on its own, but if Go Hard couldn't target your own units, it creates some really interesting counterplay, or deck building potential if Go Hard was ever the strongest card in the game again, because all of a sudden you can build a deck with very few units, and then Go Hard essentially becomes a dead draw for your opponent. And that would, I think, create some really interesting scenarios where Go Hard is, some matches is really good, and in some matches is the worst card you can get, whereas there are very few of those matches right now. I mean, Feel the Rush is kind of one, but other than that, there isn't really another one going, whereas this would make it so that, you can play around your thing. Maybe you create some burn list that's just, a bunch of spells, right? And that would farm Go Hard because they can't target your units, and, they're just left there, and you can just burn them down and they can never heal. And that would be a really interesting way of playing the game, I think. So I see no reason why Go Hard, you could stop yourself from targeting your own units to get that Pack Your Bags, because now I'm gonna, you've played 2 Go Hards, I'm just not gonna play any units. You don't have enough to kill me yet. I've got a bunch of spells in hand, I can slowly sort of work my way. I'm only gonna play units that have more than 5 health now, that kind of thing I think would be really interesting. Whereas as the card is right now, your opponent can essentially just say, well, I'm just going to Go Hard my own unit to Pack Your Bags and deal 5 Nexus damage, and then you're going to lose. So that is how I would change it. Go Hard. I would bring up the cost of Pack Your Bags mana wise, and I would make it so that you cannot target your own units with the Go Hard. And I think that would be a change which would ultimately see the card still be decent and within certain metas still be very strong indeed, but not quite as strong or oppressive perhaps as we have right now. So feel free to let me know what you think in the comments, what you would do with Go Hard, whether you wouldn't nerf Go Hard but nerf other cards in that deck perhaps instead. I don't think that this has been, the most oppressive deck of all time, but I just think it is a bit of a bore to play against these days, and I would like to see it changed. So with that said, leave a like, comment and subscribe. I've been Chris. Have a really nice day.